In the quiet darkness of deep space, far away from Earth, a science ship named Krellin 5 floated near the edge of the Andromeda Research Belt. On board were some of the most brilliant alien minds in the galaxy: biologists, geneticists, and researchers who had studied thousands of species from hundreds of planets. Their mission was simple: explore unknown life forms and decode the secrets of evolution. Across the universe, one of these scientists, Dr. Kavanagh, was a tall, thin alien with 4 eyes and skin like silver stone. He had spent his whole life studying how species grow and change, but nothing had ever surprised him until now. They had just picked up a strange energy signal coming from a faraway planet called Earth. Earth was marked as primitive in the galactic database. The Federation considered it unimportant, a place of simple mammals and water. No one ever paid attention to it. But this signal wasn't simple. It wasn't just noise. It was a pattern of code hidden deep in something familiar: human DNA. At first, Dr. Kavanagh thought it was a mistake. How could such a young species create a signal strong enough to reach space? But when the team scanned the human DNA samples stored in their database, they all saw that the signal was real and it was alive. There was a part of the DNA sequence that didn't belong. It wasn't like any natural mutation or evolution. It was placed there like a message sealed inside a bottle, waiting to be opened. "This code is to clean," whispered assistant biologist Vekra. "It looks designed." Kavanagh nodded, eyes wide. But by whom? And why hide it inside human genes? The team worked day and night, decoding the strange sequence. It was locked, protected by a kind of encryption that responded to alien scanning tools. It was as if the code could tell who was watching it, and then it began to shift. One line of code suddenly unlocked, and a sound wave burst through the lab's audio system. The scientists froze. The sound wasn't loud, but it was sharp, like a whisper being shouted from another world. It didn't use any known language, but somehow every alien in the room understood it. It said one word: run. The lab fell silent. No one knew how to react. How could a piece of DNA carry a spoken message? And worse, why did it know they were listening? Dr. Kavanagh ordered a full lockdown of the lab. All systems were secured. The DNA samples were moved into sealed chambers, and security bots were placed at every door. But fear had already entered the minds of the crew. Later, that night, while reviewing the scan logs, Kavanagh noticed something even more disturbing. The DNA samples had begun reacting on their own. Cell activity had doubled. Strange light pulses flickered across the samples, as if the cells were communicating with each other. Some even changed color slightly, an impossible thing for human cells to do. "This isn't a signal," he whispered to himself, horrified. "It's a protocol." By morning, the team had confirmed the worst. Human DNA had a hidden layer, an ancient, secret combat protocol, activated only when certain alien tech touched it. It didn't protect the human body directly. It didn't fight infections or heal wounds. Instead, it did something far stranger. It began to think. It rewrote its own code. It looked at alien life and responded. "It's like a defense system," Vekra said, "but not for humans, for the DNA itself." Kavanagh sat still, staring at the screen. His fingers trembled. "This wasn't meant for humans to use," he said slowly. "This was meant to stop us from touching them outside the lab." Nothing had changed. The stars still glowed, and the ship still hummed softly, but inside, fear grew with every second. No one had ever seen a species with living, adaptive DNA that could sense a threat and send a message across space. And this message wasn't a request for help. It wasn't a beacon asking for peace. It was a warning. Suddenly, alarms blared across the ship. Systems began to glitch. Screens flickered. Security doors opened and closed on their own. The DNA samples glowed brighter. One of the scientists collapsed, clutching his head. His mind filled with unknown images: battlefields, giant shadows, fire raining from skies, visions of war, but not from any known planet. "These are memories," he gasped. "These aren't dreams. These are memories stored in the DNA." Kavanagh's heart sank. "Whose memories?" he asked. The scientist looked up, eyes wide with terror. "Ours and theirs." Outside the chamber, something buzzed, a vibration, soft at first, then louder. Something had woken up. And for the first time in centuries, the alien scientists realized the truth: human DNA wasn't just alive. It was waiting. Waiting for someone to come too close, waiting to fight back, and they had just triggered it. The silence after the alarm was louder than the noise itself. Dr. Kavanagh stood frozen in the control room of Krellin 5, staring at the glowing DNA samples behind the glass. The samples were no longer still. They moved slightly, slowly, like something breathing beneath the surface of a calm ocean. No one spoke. Every alien scientist in the room watched as the impossible happened. Human DNA was changing itself in real time. Across the control panel, red lights blinked wildly. Systems were being overridden not by an external virus or a computer attack, but from within. The DNA wasn't just reacting to alien touch anymore. It was communicating with the ship's systems through energy pulses. "Is this evolution?" whispered Assistant Vecra, her voice shaking. "No," Kavanagh said grimly. "This is activation." Without warning, the containment chamber lights flickered. Inside, one of the samples had begun multiplying. Cells split, double, and shaped themselves into a rough form. Not exactly human, not exactly alien, but something new. Something built for one purpose: to respond to intrusion. "Shut it down," Kavanagh barked. "Deactivate all connections. Cut the lab power." They tried. The ship refused. Their own vessel had been infected by the protocol. Not with a virus in the usual sense, but with biological intelligence. A new kind. A living signal riding through the ship's metal veins, like a ghost in the circuitry. It was no longer just about DNA. It was about defense, and they were now considered a threat. In Lab Sector 3, the first real sign of danger appeared. The glowing mass of rewritten DNA took shape. It twisted and formed something like a body, a clone grown entirely from the ancient code. No artificial help, no lab machine, just the protocol doing exactly what it had been designed to do: adapt and survive. The clone opened its eyes, but they were not human eyes. They were deep, reflective, filled with stars, and they locked directly onto the camera lens, as if it knew it was being watched. "How is it alive already?" someone asked, trembling. "It was never dead," Kavanagh said softly. "It was waiting." The creature didn't move at first. It simply sat, breathing, watching. Then slowly, almost respectfully, it stood up. It looked around the containment chamber, analyzing everything with precision. Within seconds, it found the weak point in the glass of vibration node near the oxygen regulator. And then, with one motion, it struck. The reinforced glass meant to withstand asteroids shattered like ice. Sirens screamed. Guards ran in, weapons raised. But the clone was faster than them, not wild or angry, strategic. It dodged, twisted, and dropped them with exact hits. Not fatal, just enough to disable. It avoided killing. It understood restraint. "This thing is using non-lethal takedowns," said Vecra in disbelief. "Like a soldier." Dr. Kavanagh's thoughts raced. This wasn't a mindless weapon. It was trained. It had memory. It knew tactics, and worst of all, it had purpose. The clone moved through the ship like it had studied the blueprint, knew every corner, every escape route. It wasn't just reacting anymore. It had a mission. "Where's it going?" shouted one officer. "To the mainframe," Kavanagh answered. "It's going to talk to the ship." They chased after it, but the clone was already there. Inside the central control chamber, it placed one glowing hand on the ship's core. And then everything stopped. The lights froze. The air turned cold. Every screen across the ship displayed a single image: a planet burning, cities crumbling, and shadows walking through fire. Not humans, not aliens, something older than both. Then came the voice, not from speakers, from inside their heads, a voice that said, calmly, "You touch what was never yours. This is not a war. This is a memory, and memories do not forget." The voice faded, and the screens turned to black. The clone turned away from the core. Its job done. It returned to the lab, walked into its own containment chamber, and sat down again, calm, like nothing had happened. The ship returned to normal. Power was restored. But silence felt heavier than ever before. Kavanagh looked at the creature through the glass. "It's not trying to escape," he whispered. "It just wanted to send a message." The assistant beside him asked the question no one wanted to voice. "To us?" Kavanagh shook his head. "To everyone." Back on Earth, humans went on with their day, unaware of what had just been awakened far above them. They had no idea their DNA held a secret weapon, an ancient code of war and memory, a buried truth that had finally been triggered. And now that it had spoken once, it was only a matter of time before it spoke again. The ship felt different now. Not broken, not under attack, just aware. Everything aboard Krellin 5 was back online. The lights worked. The air systems hummed. The computers followed commands, but the crew moved like ghosts, quietly, nervously, as if the walls themselves were listening. And in a way, they were, because the clone grown from the human DNA protocol was still alive, still calm, still waiting in its chamber. Dr. Kavanagh hadn't slept. He sat in front of the main monitor, playing the same sequence over and over again, the vision broadcasted by the clone through the ship systems, the burning world, the giant shadows, the fire. It was too real to be fake, too sharp to be symbolic. And the question that haunted him was simple, chilling, and urgent. Whose memories are these? Vecra, the assistant biologist, joined him in silence. She didn't ask anything. She just sat, holding a scanner in her hands, watching the clone. Through the glass, "It hasn't moved in hours," she whispered. "It doesn't need to," Kavanagh replied. "It's not here to fight. It's here to remind." He reached forward and touched the screen. Or remind us of what? That's when he remembered the forbidden archive, a dark, restricted database sealed centuries ago by the Galactic Federation. Only senior-level scientists and government leaders had access. But the emergency override key now lay in front of him. The clone had unlocked it when it accessed the mainframe. With shaking fingers, Kavanagh entered the secured files, and what he saw nearly stopped his heart. Earth was not originally red zone for being primitive. It was red zone for being too dangerous. Thousands of years ago, before humans built cities or carved tools, an alien race had visited Earth, not to harm, to uplift. They believed early humans had potential, so they injected a genetic sedan, experimental nanogene designed to speed up evolution, boost intelligence, and create a cooperative species to join the galactic community. But the plan failed. Not only did humans evolve faster, they evolved differently. Their bodies absorbed the nanogenes and rewrote them. Their brains adapted in unpredictable ways. They didn't follow the path of peace or submission. They began dreaming strange dreams, drawing weapons no one had shown them, developing instincts no one had taught them. The experimenters tried to stop it, but it was too late. A hidden war began. In the shadows of forgotten galaxies, a battle was fought between the creators and their unintended creation, the humans, young, wild, and terrifying, turned on their benefactors with strategies and tactics their minds should not have known. They hacked systems without machines. They sensed traps without seeing them. They built without tools. And most shocking of all, they remembered. Each generation was born with knowledge from the last, not taught by parents or elders, but written in their DNA. They encoded memory and biology. Kavanagh whispered in horror. They turned their own genes into history books. That was the truth. Human DNA wasn't just a code for life. It was a living archival weapon made from memory, fear, instinct, and survival. Every war, every betrayal, every death had been recorded and stored, not in books or machines, in blood. And now, after thousands of years, that archive had been unlocked. The clone wasn't just alive, it was remembering. In the containment chamber, the clone stirred for the first time in hours. It opened its eyes again, those deep, cosmic eyes that seemed old for the face they belonged to. And this time, it spoke only to words. "You forgot." The ship trembled, not physically but emotionally. Every crew member who heard the voice felt something strange, like a forgotten nightmare climb back into their minds. Flashes of things they'd never lived through but somehow remembered. Vecra dropped her scanner. "I saw it," she whispered. "I saw a battlefield. I was holding something, a human weapon. It's not just remembering its memories," Kavanagh realized. "It's sharing them with us." And just like that, the truth became even worse. The genetic protocol didn't just protect humanity. It punished those who tampered with it by forcing them to relive humanity's darkest memories. Each alien aboard Krellin 5 began seeing visions, images of humans trapped in chains, of fire and rebellion, of starships exploding and ancient beings screaming in languages long dead. Some collapsed, some cried, and one tried to eject himself into space. Kavanagh held his head, breathing hard. The memory inside him wasn't his, but it felt real. He had seen through the eyes of a human soldier, someone who had once stood alone on a dying moon, facing 5 enemy ships with nothing but courage and silence. And he had one Dr. Kavanagh. Vecra said shakily, "These are not just battle memories. They are instructions." He stared at her. "They're teaching us how they fought," she said, "teaching us how they survived." The clone stood again. This time, it raised a hand toward the glass, not to break it, but to make contact, gently, slowly dot and across. The screen, one final message appeared in glowing, golden letters. We were never weak. We were only asleep, and now they were waking up. The clone's hand stayed on the glass dot. It didn't move. It didn't speak. But something behind its eyes had changed. It no longer looked like a creation confused by the world. It looked like a soldier waiting for orders. Outside the containment chamber, Dr. Kavanagh stood in stunned silence. Around him, the crew of Krellin 5 whispered in fear, arguing quietly over what they had seen. Visions, flashbacks, pain, and one question growing louder in their minds. What happens if the clone decides to leave? Kavanagh knew that question didn't matter anymore, because the clone wouldn't have to leave the chamber to take control. It already had. Without warning, the ship's gravity shifted slightly. Not enough to throw anyone off their feet, but enough for the trained crew to notice. Systems began blinking again, this time slower, calmer, as if being tuned by an invisible hand. The lights dimmed, not from failure, but choice. Vector leaned in close to the main monitor. Dr. Kavanagh, the ship's control logs, they're being rewritten. By who? He asked. Not who. What? She said, her voice dry. The clone dot had reached into the ship's nervous system again. Not through hacking or brute force, but through resonance. A new form of communication, biological transmission through energy fields. The same kind of field the DNA had used when it first triggered the warning. Suddenly, the ship's lights blinked twice and went dark. For 3 seconds, the crew floated in silence. Then the emergency lights kicked in, red and slow. The ship had entered lockdown, but not one they initiated. The clone had done it. Dr. Kavanagh stared at the darkened control deck. This isn't a defense mechanism anymore, he said. It's a hostile takeover. But what none of them could explain, what none of them wanted to admit, was that the clone hadn't hurt anyone. Not fatally. It hadn't attacked again. It hadn't spoken, and yet it now controlled the most advanced scientific ship in the Andromeda research fleet. The reason was chillingly simple. It didn't need violence to win. It had memory. And memory was power. While the crew scrambled to override systems, trying and failing to regain command, Kavanagh accessed the core memory stream. What he found sent chills through every nerve in his body. The clone was replaying moments from its genetic archive, broadcasting them directly into the ship's AI, feeding the computer visual records of past battles, survival instincts, tactical responses, things no synthetic system had ever been designed to hold. The ship wasn't resisting. It was learning. It's teaching the ship to think like a human. Kavanagh whispered. But why? Vector asked. What does it gain from that? Not gain, he replied slowly. It's preparing for something else. As if on cue, the ship's long-range antenna activated on its own. A wideband transmission launched silently into deep space. Coordinates, data packets, a stream of compressed genetic code. What was that? Asked the technician. Kavanagh didn't answer. His mind raced. The clone had just sent the protocol to someone. Somewhere. Every screen aboard flickered. Then a new image appeared. Not war, not fire, but a map, dotted with star systems, marked with circles and blinking red zones, unknown planets, research bases, medical archives, places where, over the past 100 years, human samples had been collected, tested, and stored. The message was clear. I know where my pieces are. It was calling them home, or worse, awakening them. Suddenly, an alarm blared, not one from Krellin 5, but from the Federation's emergency channel. Unauthorized data burst received by over 16 Federation ships, the voice announced. Security breach at 3 Black Site labs, unidentified cellular activity detected, cloning. Process started, containment failed, awaiting command. Kavanagh felt his breath leave his body. The clone wasn't alone anymore. It had activated the others. Stop the signal, someone shouted, but it was too late. It had already spread. The clone in the chamber turned its head slightly, almost in response, as if it knew they were listening, as if it wanted them to know. This wasn't a warning anymore. This was a campaign. The awakening protocol was being downloaded silently across the galaxy, inside labs, freezers, backup drives, even inside museum pieces where preserved human DNA had been left forgotten. Wherever there was a fragment of humanity, the clone's message would reach. It was never about protecting Earth. It was about reminding the universe what Earth once did, and what it could do again. Kavanagh looked around at his crew, some terrified, some frozen, some still whispering about the strange memories they were having. All of them were afraid. Then the clone finally moved. It raised one hand slowly and tapped a panel inside its chamber. The door unlocked. The glass slid open, but the clone didn't step out. It waited. And on every screen across the ship, 3 new words appeared. Not war, just justice. Balance must return. Kavanagh understood. The clone didn't want revenge. It wasn't here to destroy the galaxy. It was here to correct it, and the galaxy wasn't ready. The doors stayed open. The clone stood still. Inside the chamber, not stepping out, not moving forward, just standing, as if waiting. But waiting for what? No one knew, not even Dr. Kavanagh. Across Krellin 5, fear no longer ran like panic. It moved slower now, deeper. It felt like something ancient rising from beneath cold ground. The silence wasn't just from systems shutting down. It was the silence of realization. Everyone aboard had felt the shift. This wasn't an attack. It wasn't chaos. It was a message, and it wasn't from the clone. It was from Earth. Kavanagh sat alone in the observation deck, a place made for stargazing and quiet thinking. He opened the deep archives again, scanning through ancient, forbidden logs. The deeper he went, the more red warnings blinked across the screen. Classified, restricted, do not access. But he kept going. Finally, he found it. Echo File 137E, Origin. Memory fragment. Source, Earth. The file was buried so deep, even the Galactic Federation might have forgotten it existed. It wasn't a report. It wasn't a document. It was a recording. A voice. Human. Old. Broken, but still proud. Kavanagh leaned in as the file played. If you're hearing this, then they found us again. You think we're just bones and dust down here, don't you? You think we forgot the war. But we didn't. We buried it. Buried the rage, the knowledge, the fire. We hid it in our children. The voice coughed, crackled, then continued. We saw what you did. You came to our planet with light in your hands and poison in your hearts. You told us you were gods. You weren't. You were scared. Scared of what we'd become if we weren't in control. So you gave us your genes, your tech, your lies, and we gave you our silence. But don't mistake our silence for weakness. We are the storm you thought you escaped. Kavanagh stared at the screen, heart pounding. The file wasn't just a record. It was a declaration, not of war but of history, a history the galaxy had erased. He forwarded the message to the command deck. The crew gathered, silent, as the human voice echoed across the room. We put our memory in blood, our truth in flesh, our war in our code. We turned our children into vaults, not victims, and we waited. One day, someone like you would touch us again, try to study us, control us, rewrite us. And when that day came, we didn't want revenge. We wanted you to see us for what we are. We are not tools. We are not test subjects. We are not your mistake. We are the last free thing in the universe, and freedom remembers. When the message ended, no one moved, not a whisper, not a breath. Even the clone, still in its chamber, lowered its eyes like the voice had reached it to, and maybe it had, because now a second message appeared on the central screen, one the ship hadn't pulled from any archive. It was being broadcast live. Coordinates. Earth. A specific point on the planet. Kavanagh pulled up the old planetary maps and zoomed in. The coordinates didn't point to a city or research facility. They pointed to a deep cave buried beneath ancient stone, marked with a symbol never decoded before. Is that a vault? Vecra asked. No. Kavanagh said, narrowing his eyes. That's the source. They weren't dealing with a random mutation. They weren't studying a fluke. In human biology, this had all been deliberate. The cave was the origin of the signal, the place where the first human memory had been stored, the center of the combat protocol. The cave was Earth's last defense and its first truth. And the Federation had never known, but someone had. Someone inside the Federation had buried this history, blocked it, erased every trace. That meant Earth hadn't been forgotten by accident. It had been hidden on purpose, because the truth of what humans were scared them. Send a warning to Central Command. Kavanagh ordered, tell them not to go near Earth. Not until we understand what we're dealing with. But before the message could be sent, the clone finally stepped out of its chamber. No one stopped it. It didn't run. It didn't attack. It walked slowly to the viewing deck and stared out at the stars. Toward Earth. Then it spoke again, for the first time since the takeover. You erased us from your records, it said softly, but we never erased you from ours. It turned to face them, eyes ancient, and now our memory has remembered itself. Kavanagh met its gaze. "What do you want?" The clone tilted its head slightly. "Not what? Who?" it replied. "The ones who silenced us. Who erased the file. Who feared the day the vault would open. We're not looking for war. We're looking for them." The protocol spread across the galaxy. Something ancient was stirring. It started quietly, too quietly for most to notice. A flicker in a data vault on a medical research station near Tau Ceti. A temperature spike inside a cold storage chamber. At a forgotten outpost above TRAPPIST-1, then came the malfunction's lights dimming. Energy fields pulsing strangely, containment units unlocking themselves. At first, the events were dismissed as system errors, glitches, faulty code. They were wrong. These weren't errors. They were echoes. Onboard Krellin 5, the clone stood at the viewing deck, still facing the stars, its voice calm but sharp. "It's begun." Dr. Kavanagh didn't need to ask what it meant. The message that had gone out, the activation signal, had reached every fragment of human DNA, scattered across the known universe. Every piece, no matter how small, had heard the call, and they were answering. From abandoned genetics labs to museum specimens, from long-lost scientific storage rooms to ships that had once carried Earth samples for study, the response was the same. Awakening cells that had been frozen for decades began to glow faintly. Clones that had failed to develop before now pulsed with life. Machines that had stored human samples for academic purposes began experiencing memory overload, and everywhere, the same message kept appearing on screens, walls, and in the minds of those nearby. "We remember." On a classroom moon orbiting Velnari Prime, inside a black site research station that hadn't seen visitors in 50 years, security alarms blared for the first time in decades. Guards rushed to the old vaults, only to find that their automated systems had been overridden. Inside one containment pod, a childlike clone had formed its body small, its eyes glowing like fire trapped under glass. It stood, faced the guards, and whispered one word that none of them understood, yet all of them felt. Just as, seconds later, the station's weapons systems disarmed themselves. The clone walked into the command chamber, unharmed, and took a seat, silent, not attacking, not escaping. Just waiting. Waiting like it had done before. Waiting like it had been trained to do, not by teachers but by memory itself. In the Galactic Council Hall, located deep in the core of Zovarin, the emergency session was called. Holograms of high-level commanders, scientists, and counselors flickered into place around the circular chamber. "We have over 30 confirmed awakenings," one counselor barked. 2 on military outposts, 5 in government archives, 1 inside a genetic museum for children. "Contain them," another shouted. "Destroy the samples. Lock down all research involving Terran species." But the older voices said nothing. They sat still, afraid, not of the clones, but of the truth they had buried long ago. A truth that now walked in living bodies made from their own mistakes. Counselor Thrin, an ancient being with skin like dried coral, leaned forward slowly. "We tried to erase them once," she said. "We failed, and now they've remembered." One of the newer members scoffed. "It's just DNA. What can they possibly do?" She turned her ancient eyes toward him. "They can remind us who we really are, and who we were afraid to become." Back aboard Krellin 5, Vecra sat alone in the medbay, reviewing neural scans of the crew. One by one, they were showing signs of something strange: false memories, rapid neural connection growth, dreams that did not belong to them. Some were dreaming in languages never spoken before. Some saw flashes of battles that hadn't happened. In their lifetimes, they're spreading the memories, she whispered, not just to themselves, to us. Dr. Kavanagh entered silently, reading her notes. "The protocol isn't just physical," he said. "It's psychic, memetic. It doesn't just live in cells. It lives in symbols, sound, rhythm, thought. They encoded it in everything," Vecra added, "in speech, in dreams, in touch." The clone, now calmly seated in the ship's archive chamber, began to hum softly. It wasn't a tune. It was a frequency. Within seconds, ship systems shifted. Again, not in fear and sync. The clone was now part of the ship. No commands. No violence. Just alignment. Aboard the Federation flagship Serexis, Admiral Yulin watched security footage of a human clone standing still in a lab as a squad of soldiers surrounded it. The clone said nothing, did nothing. Yet one by one, the soldiers lowered their weapons. Some cried, One removed his helmet and dropped to his knees. "What is this?" Yulin demanded. His science officer looked pale. "We ran brain scans on them. They were exposed to the clone's presence. For less than 90 seconds, their neural patterns changed. Memories downloaded of things they never lived. They're being reprogrammed?" Yulin asked. "Not reprogrammed," the officer whispered, reminded. Back on Krellin 5, the clone finally stood again. It walked slowly through the ship, past the crew, who no longer backed away. It wasn't a monster now. It was something else, something older, something true. In the central chamber, it faced Dr. Kavanagh and said, "You were not the first to find us." Kavanagh nodded. "I know." The clone tilted its head. "But you might be the first to listen." It placed one hand on the ship's command panel and downloaded the last piece of the message. A final transmission. This one wasn't for ships or labs or stations. This one was for Earth. A long-frequency signal sent toward the blue planet that had once buried its fire in silence. The clone looked at Kavanagh. "It's time they remembered to." The new Traytide message reached Earth. It passed through satellites, bounced off aging signal towers, slipped through underground cables long thought broken. It whispered through oceans, echoed in forests, and rang quietly through every human cell on the planet, waking something that had never truly slept. The broadcast wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was made of memory, and memory always finds its way home. On board Krellin 5, the clone stood in the center of the ship's command chamber. Around it, the crew remained still, not with fear anymore, but with respect. The ship, once designed to study and control, now quietly obeyed the clone's presence. It wasn't submission. It was recognition. Dr. Kavanagh stood across from it. He was no longer just a scientist. He was now a witness to history, a history that had been erased, rewritten, and now returned. "What will happen now?" he asked, softly. The clone raised its gaze to the stars outside the viewport. "Now the galaxy decides what it truly is." In the Galactic Council Hall, chaos turned to silence. Dozens of species, hundreds of delegates, thousands of messages flooding. In every corner of the known universe was reporting the same phenomenon. Awakenings, visions, soldiers collapsing in awe, machines shutting down not from damage but from shame. Species who had long believed they were powerful now stood humble in the face of a truth they had denied. Earth had not been forgotten. Earth had simply been waiting. Some wanted war. Some demanded eradication of all remaining human samples. Others, older and wiser, said nothing because deep down they understood. You do not make war against a memory. You make peace with it. It was Counselor Thren who finally stood, voice heavy and quiet, speaking for the oldest civilizations. "We once made a treaty of silence. We buried what we did. We erased their name from the stars. But they remembered us. They wrote it in their blood, and now they ask not for vengeance. They ask to be seen." Back on Earth, something strange happened. Across the globe, children began to dream. Dreams of battles in the void, of light and darkness, of fire that could speak and stars that could cry. But the dreams were not scary. They were sad. They were soft. And every child who woke up remembered one simple thing they had never been taught. We are more than we were told. In a small village near the Andes, an old woman touched the side of a stone she had passed her entire life, one carved by hands. No one remembered. And for the first time, she understood what the markings meant. Her ancestors had not come from weakness. They had come from survival. They had come from truth. A new session was called, not in a courtroom, not in a war room, but in a neutral zone, above the galactic core. One representative from every starfaring species. No weapons, no ranks, only memory. And standing before them one clone, not angry, not armed. Just alive. The clone walked to the center of the chamber and placed a single drop of blood onto the floor. It shimmered with golden light. Around them, images appeared, ancient battles, voices long gone, galaxies lost to time. But more than that, the images showed choices, times when humans could have destroyed, but didn't, times when they could have ruled, but stayed silent, times when they hid, not from fear, but from hope. That the clone spoke not in anger, but in strength. We were made into tools, then made into threats, then made into nothing. We are none of those things. It turned slowly, meeting every gaze. We are not your enemy, but we will never again be your secret. We remember everything, and now, so, must you. The vote was held. Not with politics, not with power, but with presence. One by one, each representative placed their hand over the clone's bloodlight. And one by one, the light grew brighter not from agreement, but from understanding. In the end, only one did not place a hand, a general from the Sithri Empire, the same species that had helped erase Earth's name from history. He stared at the clone, eyes cold. "You expect us to forgive?" he asked. The clone did not answer. Instead, it stepped forward, placed its hand over the general's heart, and showed him a memory. A small boy, human, lost in the jungle after war, starving, dying. But when an alien scout ship passed, the boy raised his hand not in hate, but in hope. The scout ship left him there. The boy died alone, but his DNA carried the memory forward. And now, the general had seen it. He looked down, breathing hard, then placed his hand on the light, and the treaty was made. Back aboard Krellin 5, the crew gathered one last time. The clone stood ready to leave. "Where will you go?" Vecra asked. The clone looked toward Earth, home, but not to lead, not to rule, only to remind. Caverner stepped forward. "Will we see more of you?" The clone smiled faintly. "You already do." Then it vanished into light, broken into particles of memory, and returned to the stars.